I'm talking about a field studies course where I took 11 students to India and we looked at community-based ecotourism in practice. When we go to the literature, it's very clear that trying to teach the practice and the ethics of sustainability in an applied business context is a big challenge. What I do in my course is I liken it to trying to juggle with 3 balls, each ball representing one pillar of sustainability. So you have economic, social, and environmental, and you're trying to work with all 3 at the same time. So generally for business students, we're very good at just playing around with one ball, which is your economic sustainability. So we're very good at thinking about profit. In corporate social responsibility, we try and add in a second ball, which might be social sustainability. So then you start to get into this challenge of trying to juggle with 2 balls. And it already becomes a little bit more difficult. When you add in the third ball, unless you really have focus, skill, and you practice it, you're going to end up dropping the balls. This was actually a new Colombo Plan funded course where 11 students came to northern India with me, and we did 3 weeks in country looking at community-based ecotourism. It needed to cover both the course content, which was community-based ecotourism, and it also aimed to get young Australians very much embedded in the cultural context so that they became more familiar with business practices in Asia. The course itself was divided into 3 parts, where we had 4 days of classes. We also did a lot of cultural activities. After that, we did a couple of days of touring. Then the students went into their placements, where they worked very closely alongside those business providers to understand the concepts in practice. We had a number of workshops trying to unpack what they'd observed and also spending the time working on their assignments, which I'll go through in a minute. I really only focused on 5 so-called threshold concepts. And the 5 concepts were getting them thinking about tourism holistically. Who holds power? How are decisions made? How is that power shared across? How do people benefit from tourism? I also wanted them to think in terms of value creation. So how do we design a tourism experience to get that impact both for the tourist, for the local community, and for the environment, as well as the tourism provider? We also talked about benchmarking and indicators. So there's no point having these big plans if you don't actually record what you're doing and think about how you're progressing. And then finally, we looked at structural change. So what's coming ahead in the future, things like climate change, etc., and how does that impact on what they're learning, and are they seeing any of that in practice? So they had a couple of workshops pre-departure where I asked them to think very carefully. So it was more of a reflective exercise about why they picked a particular placement, what they expected to get out of it, what they brought to that placement, so what they were expecting to contribute, as well as what challenges they thought they might encounter. And then we also focused on how it would build their skills professionally, personally, and linked to the Griffith graduate attributes. After the first few days of course content, we had a quiz. The third assessment is where it starts to get really interesting, because that was a vlog where I asked them to record their experiences at the placements and try and identify the concepts that we talked about in class in practice. Finally, assessment 4 was back at the workshops, where I asked them to think about one strategy that they could feed back to the placement provider, to the ecotourism provider, around sustainability. So how could they further develop their sustainability in practice? I was very, very, very pleased and proud of how the students performed. I thought they developed their critical thinking skills really well. These were not necessarily tourism students. They came from a range of backgrounds, and the assessments that they provided me, I think, worked really well. Because we were on a field studies course and they were away from their usual place of work, their families, boyfriends, jobs, we avoided all of those usual distractions, and it got them really focused on the course content. They did a lot of activities to really immerse them into the culture in India. And I think rehearsing things as well really helps. So practice, how are we going to capture this? What are you looking for? How will you ask these questions? So I didn't overload them with course content. So I was very happy with just having 5 threshold concepts. As long as they had understood that, I was happy for them to go into the placements. There was a bit of peer evaluation because we watched all the vlogs together. So they wanted to perform well because they knew that these other 10 people that they'd been together with were going to be seeing the outcomes. So it was really planned very, very carefully. But at the same time, because there wasn't too much crammed into it, we could also keep it quite fluid to match the sort of conditions in India where things can change quite quickly. I also spend a lot of time thinking about what learning outcomes I wanted. So how to match the course content to the situation, to the assessments to really drive at that sustainability issue. So the last thing that I would really recommend is not overcrowding the course with content. So I kept it only down to the 5 course concepts. And I think by doing that, by not overloading them, it helped them really sort of work with those things in practice and identify them in practice.